Ethan Cross sat in the cockpit of the drop pod, his fingers steady on the harness as the countdown flashed red on the screen. The voice of the Zelvar announcer, smooth and condescending, echoed through the intercom. The human Challenger is moments away from landing on Vorath 7. Estimated survival time, less than 3 minutes. The alien audience laughed, their voices a mixture of clicks and reverberations. Ethan exhaled slowly. He knew the odds. The Zelvar weren't wrong about the conditions. Vorath 7 was a death trap. The air itself was toxic, the constant rain was a corrosive soup that could dissolve steel, and the ground was laced with acidic geysers capable of vaporizing flesh on contact. No species had ever set foot on the planet and lived to tell about it. That was exactly why he was here. The pod slammed into the surface with a brutal impact, hydraulic dampeners groaning under the strain. Before the system even confirmed touchdown, Ethan was moving. He ripped off the harness, grabbed his gear pack, and punched the release button. The hatch blew open, revealing a sky of swirling green storms and sheets of rain so thick they blurred the landscape. The first drop hit his exposed glove. The reinforced polymer hissed, a tiny hole appearing in seconds. The aliens watching from their climate-controlled observation station chuckled among themselves. The fragile human was seconds away from being reduced to a skeleton. Ethan moved fast. He yanked a pressurized sheet of carbon weave polymer from his pack and slapped it onto the ground, securing the corners with reinforced spikes. The moment it made contact, microreactors activated, causing the material to expand, forming a protective dome within seconds. Acid droplets sizzled against the surface but rolled harmlessly off the slick coating. He dove inside just as the downpour intensified, sealing the makeshift shelter with a quick lock mechanism. His HUD flashed warnings, oxygen reserves were stable, but outside conditions were deteriorating fast. The Zelvar were silent now. Ethan smirked. He knew what they were thinking. They'd expected him to panic, to scramble helplessly as his suit corroded, screaming for mercy until his flesh melted away. Instead, in less than 5 minutes, he had a shelter capable of withstanding the storm. He tapped his comms. "I assume you're still watching?" A hiss of static, then the voice of Overseer Velos, the Zelvar scientist who had personally bet on his failure. "You delayed the inevitable. Your primitive ingenuity changes nothing. The planet will consume you soon enough." Ethan adjusted his visor, checking his data. The temperature was rising. Not from the weather, something was moving outside. His shelter rattled slightly. Then again. Something heavy was circling him. He activated his external feed, adjusting the filter to cut through the rain. The grainy image sharpened, revealing a hulking silhouette moving through the storm. Not a drone. Not a machine. A living creature. Ethan leaned forward, pulse steady. The Zelvar had said nothing could survive Vorath 7's surface. Yet here was something that had adapted to it. Outside, the thing paused, sniffing at the shelter. The acid rain rolled off its thick, chitinous hide like water on glass. Its eyes, glowing faintly through the storm, locked onto Ethan's shelter. Then it charged. Ethan had seconds to react. Ethan's heart raced, but his mind was calm. His training kicked in, every calculation, every survival tactic he'd ever learned, surged forward in the blink of an eye. The creature outside was moving fast, and if it reached the shelter before he had a chance to reinforce it, the flimsy polymer would be nothing more than shredded debris. The creature's enormous form collided with the shelter. The impact rattled the walls, and a high-pitched screech pierced the air as it tested the outer shell, its talons scratching against the reinforced surface. Ethan had seen creatures like this before in his simulations, but never in the real world, never when his life was at stake. The force of the creature's strike was enough to warp the polymer. A jagged crack ran along the edge where the impact hit, and he knew the shelter wouldn't hold for long. His eyes flicked to the toolkit strapped to his belt. One of the tools had to be strong enough to handle this. He had one shot at this. If he failed, the creature would breach the shelter, and acid rain would quickly finish him off. With a swift motion, Ethan unclipped a nano-welding torch and fired it up. The high-powered heat melted through the polymer, creating a defensive seal, but it was temporary. He needed something more permanent. The shelter shook again as the creature raked at it with terrifying speed, its claws tearing through the material. Ethan slammed the torch against the crack, sending sparks flying. He could hear the Zelvar murmuring in the observation room, their voices distant but unmistakably tense. They hadn't anticipated a human having the skills, or the nerve, to handle something like this. Ethan's focus remained unbroken. The storm outside intensified, a torrential downpour that splashed against the shelter's walls like a flood of acid. The creature's thrashing didn't help. With every shake, the shelter creaked, groaned, as though it were about to collapse. Ethan pushed the panic out of his thoughts, focusing on his task. His hands were steady, even as the surrounding atmosphere seemed to press in, suffocating, unrelenting. He applied more pressure with the torch, the heated end melting through the exposed polymer to create a new, thicker layer. The creature outside growled in frustration, realizing it wasn't going to break through as easily as it thought. The rumbling ceased for a moment. Then, a deep, guttural roar echoed through the storm, and Ethan saw the creature's shadow retreat into the fog, disappearing into the acid mist. The sudden quiet was deafening. Ethan slumped against the side of the shelter, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His heart slowed, and the adrenaline left his system. He checked his suit's data readout. The environmental conditions outside were still hazardous, but the immediate threat of the creature was gone, at least for now. He scanned the horizon, wary of any more surprises, but saw nothing. Inside, the shelter was holding steady, the polymer stronger than it had any right to be. But he knew this was just a temporary victory. There was still much to be done. If he was going to survive the next 24 hours on this planet, he needed a plan, a way to stay alive, a way to communicate with the Zelvar, and most importantly, a way to prove that humanity could do the impossible. He accessed his HUD, bringing up the analysis of the creature's biology that he'd gathered during the brief encounter. He needed to know how it adapted to this hellish environment, and more importantly, if that adaptation could be replicated. The key to survival might not lie in his technology or his engineering, but in Vorath 7's own ecosystem. But the clock was ticking. The Zelvar had set a timer, and their disdain for his ability to survive was obvious. They wanted him to fail. They wanted him to be another statistic in their long catalog of human fragility. But Ethan wasn't going down like that. He stood, adjusting his gear, ready to take on whatever the planet, or the aliens, threw at him next. This was just the beginning. Ethan's breath slowed as the seconds stretched into minutes, the tension in the air palpable. The creature had retreated into the acid-laden mist, but the threat wasn't over. His eyes remained trained on the fog outside, scanning for any movement, any sign of danger. The storm outside continued its violent assault, but now it was more of a background hum compared to the silent dread that pressed down on him. It wasn't just the creatures that he had to worry about. Vorath 7 was alive in a way that no one had anticipated, a world teeming with aggressive, acid-resistant organisms that had evolved to thrive in the most inhospitable conditions imaginable. And as the shelter held strong against the rain, Ethan could feel it, a presence, something watching. He activated the motion sensors again, adjusting the settings to penetrate the storm's mist. At first, the scan showed nothing but the swirling tempest outside, but then, just beyond the shelter's perimeter, something flickered, a shadow. Before he could process it, a sharp, high-pitched screech echoed through the storm, followed by the sound of something heavy moving toward him. Ethan's instincts kicked in, his mind working in overdrive. The shelter wasn't enough, he needed a defense. The creatures, there were more of them. They had found his position, and they weren't going to let him go so easily. Ethan Cross, you are a fool. The voice of Overseer Velos crackled over the comms, condescending and cold as ever. No human can survive this planet. The creatures will tear you apart before you can even comprehend their power. Ethan didn't respond. The aliens had underestimated him before, he wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of hearing him doubt himself now. He grabbed his tactical drone from the pack, a small but effective reconnaissance unit designed to assist in hostile environments. With a flick of his wrist, the drone hummed to life, its compact form zipping out of the shelter and into the storm. He needed intel. The creatures out there weren't just random beasts, they had a purpose, a pattern of behavior that he could exploit if he had the right data. His drone darted ahead, its sensors piercing the mist, mapping the terrain as it went. The first few seconds showed nothing of interest, just the same inhospitable rock and acidic fog. But then the drone's scan picked up heat signatures. Multiple. Dozens of them. All around him. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The creatures weren't just predators, they were organized. They moved as a pack, their hunting methods as precise and dangerous as anything he had seen in his worst simulations. They were closing in. He tapped into the drone's feed, adjusting the magnification. Through the haze, he saw them, tall, agile predators with thick exoskeletons that shimmered with acid-resistant oils. Their eyes glowed faintly in the storm, predator instincts sharpened by generations of evolution. They weren't just hunting for food, they were hunting for him. Ethan recalibrated his suit's environmental filters, switching to infrared. As the storm's deadly rain obscured the visual spectrum, the heat signatures of the creatures became stark, and he could now see them moving in perfect unison. They knew exactly where he was. "You won't last the night, Earthling." Velos's voice dripped with superiority. "They'll wear you down, and then you'll join the thousands of other would-be survivors who met their end on this planet." Ethan ignored him, his mind spinning with plans. The creatures were circling, testing the boundaries of the shelter, clearly looking for weaknesses. But they weren't mindless predators, they were intelligent. They knew that the polymer could only withstand so much pressure, and they had no doubt that patience would eventually break him. The key wasn't just survival, it was outsmarting them, proving that humanity's ingenuity could outlast the odds. He checked the drone's feed again, tracking the creature's movements. The pack was splitting up, two were approaching directly, but the others had fanned out, trying to create a pincer movement. They were coordinated, adapting their strategy as they went. He needed to act fast. Ethan reached into his pack and pulled out a small device, a sound generator designed to mimic the call of a larger, more dangerous predator. If used correctly, it could drive the pack into disarray and give him a window of opportunity to escape or reinforce his shelter. With a steady hand, he activated the device. The screech that followed was deafening, an ultrasonic blast that mimicked the call of an apex predator. The creatures froze for a moment, confused. The pack leader, who had been closing in from the right, hesitated. Then, like a wave crashing against the shore, the pack scattered. Ethan didn't wait. He knew this was his chance. Grabbing his gear, he slipped out of the shelter and moved toward the far side of the clearing, keeping low and staying hidden in the acid mist. The creatures were confused, disoriented by the call, but they wouldn't be for long. He had to keep moving, stay ahead, and pray the Zelvar underestimated human resourcefulness just one more time. The storm continued its merciless assault, but Ethan didn't stop. His survival instincts had kicked into overdrive, and his mind was consumed with one thought: escape the immediate danger. The creatures were momentarily thrown off by the sonic device, but it wouldn't last. The real battle was just beginning. He had to push forward, he had to prove the impossible. The landscape of Vorath 7 seemed to warp under the heavy rain, the acidic drops lashing against his suit as he crouched low, moving through the mist. The pack of predators had split, but that didn't mean he was safe. They were smarter than he had expected, and they were still out there, hunting him. He kept low, using every bit of the terrain to cover his movements. The temperature had dropped drastically. His HUD flashed warning signs, rapid cooling, and increased acid concentration in the rain. If he didn't find shelter soon, the storm would overwhelm even the most resilient of human suits. His priority now was to find a permanent solution. Temporary fixes were only delaying the inevitable. He needed Vorath 7 secrets, the keys to survival. Just ahead, through the shifting fog, Ethan spotted a strange formation in the distance. At first, it appeared to be an outcrop of rock, but as he moved closer, the shape became clearer, a set of ruins, half buried under centuries of acid rain and environmental decay. A chill ran down his spine. He wasn't just looking at rocks. These were structures, buildings that had been constructed long before the Zelvar even charted this world. The aliens had claimed there was nothing of value on Vorath 7, nothing to explain why the planet was so dangerous. They'd assumed the creatures were the only threat. But this was different. Ethan approached cautiously, his boots sinking into the damp, acidic soil. His environmental sensors began to hum, picking up traces of energy readings that didn't belong to the natural ecosystem. Someone had harnessed the planet's energy long before the Zelvar arrived, someone who had mastered this planet's extreme conditions. A blueprint flickered in his mind as he took in the sight of the ruins. The walls, eroded by centuries of acid rain, still held faint markings, symbols that no known language could decode. But there was something familiar about them, something his mind recognized. The structures weren't just buildings, they were adaptation nodes, designed to shelter and protect the inhabitants from the acidic environment. They had been engineered to survive the planet's most brutal forces. Ethan pulled up his wrist console, activating the decoding program he had developed. He input the symbols as best as he could, hoping against hope that something, anything, would align with his theories. The screen blinked to life, revealing a schematic, a map of the planet's biosphere adaptation system. The technology was nothing like anything humanity had ever encountered. It was a self-sustaining system that could alter the very environment of Vorath 7, mitigating the dangers of the acid rain, stabilizing the atmosphere, and allowing life to flourish where none should exist. It was, quite literally, the key to survival. Ethan's fingers flew across the console. If he could activate even a fraction of this system, he could transform the landscape and make it habitable for humans. He connected his gear to the ruins, initiating a rudimentary scan. The energy source was still functional, buried deep beneath the surface. As the scan continued, the ruins seemed to hum with life. The ancient technology was awakening, responding to the signal. But then, the ground shuddered. Ethan froze. It wasn't just the storm. The ancient structure was reacting to his intrusion, as though it had been dormant for centuries and now sensed a new presence. A loud, resonating groan echoed from deep within the earth. The ruins began to shift. A massive, circular stone door, previously hidden beneath layers of rock and debris, began to rise. Ethan stepped back, eyes wide. The ancient technology had triggered a massive mechanism. The air around him vibrated with energy as if the ruins were about to reveal a secret that had been buried for millennia. For a brief moment, he thought he was witnessing something that would rewrite history. But that moment was shattered by a distant roar. The creatures had found him again. He was not alone. And the secrets of Vorath 7 had just unleashed something far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Ethan's pulse quickened as the massive insectoid creature lunged at him. Its jagged claws scraped the stone floor, and its alien eyes locked onto his, a malevolent intelligence lurking behind them. The air crackled with static, the ancient systems pulsing in response to the disturbance. The creature was a sentinel, one of the many guardians of this forgotten world. It wasn't just protecting the ruins, it was guarding the secrets buried deep within the planet's core. He barely had time to react. The creature's armored exoskeleton glinted in the dim light as it raised one massive, acid-dripping claw, ready to strike. Ethan dove to the side, narrowly missing the deadly blow. The creature's claws sank into the stone floor where he had been just moments before, leaving deep gouges in the ancient material. Ethan rolled to his feet, scanning his surroundings. The chamber had grown cold, the air thick with tension. The creature wasn't alone. More of them were emerging from the shadows, their eyes glowing faintly as they surrounded him, cutting off every escape route. He had no choice but to stand his ground. There was no time to outrun them, no time to wait for backup. He reached for his blade, a compact, high-energy cutting tool he had brought for emergencies. The blade hummed to life, a sharp blue light cutting through the darkness. The creature closest to him hesitated, its mandibles clicking as it steadied him. But the others were moving in, each step deliberate, each movement calculated. They weren't just animals, they were hunters. Ethan took a deep breath, focusing. His mind raced, trying to calculate the best course of action. The walls of the chamber were lined with organic circuitry, glowing faintly with energy. The ancient technology was alive, and it might be his only chance. With a swift motion, he charged toward one of the walls, hoping the creatures would follow. They did, predictably, closing in on him as he neared the source of the energy pulse. Ethan swung the blast blade at one of the circuit panels, cutting through the dense material. Sparks flew as the wall hissed in protest. The creatures hesitated, their movements faltering for a moment. That was enough. Ethan darted for the central pillar, where the energy was strongest. He wasn't just fighting for his life now, he was fighting for humanity's future. If he could understand how this system worked, he might be able to harness its power, or at least use it to defend himself. As he reached the pillar, the creature closest to him lunged, but he was faster. Ethan dove behind the pillar just as the creature's claws slashed through the air, narrowly missing him. The impact shook the floor beneath him, sending cracks rippling outward. He needed to act fast. His hand gripped the surface of the pillar, feeling the faint pulse of energy beneath the surface. The symbols on the pillar shifted, responding to his touch, glowing brighter as he focused on them. This was the moment. The ancient technology was alive, and it recognized him as something more than an intruder. It recognized him as someone who could unlock its potential. The pillars around the chamber began to hum louder, their organic circuitry flaring to life. The creatures snarled, disoriented by the sudden surge of energy. The walls of the chamber trembled as the system powered up, the ambient noise becoming deafening. Ethan didn't wait to see what would happen next. He knew this was his chance. If he could channel the power of the ruins, he could either turn the creatures' weapons against them or create a safe zone. It was a long shot, but it was his only shot. He focused all his energy into the system, pressing his hand against the glowing symbols. His mind locked into the ancient language, the patterns of energy coursing through his body. The creatures roared in fury, but Ethan could feel the ground beneath them begin to shift. The very air seemed to warp, and the walls of the chamber began to crack and groan. The technology responded, drawing on the planet's core. The temperature in the chamber dropped as a shockwave of energy rippled outward, pushing the creatures back. They stumbled, disoriented, as the chamber's systems hummed louder and louder, their every movement now disrupted by the surge of power. Ethan gasped for breath as the energy reached its peak. The creatures stopped their advance, frozen by the overwhelming force. The ancient technology had come alive, and for the first time in centuries, it had a new purpose. The systems had been designed to adapt, and Ethan had just proven that humanity was the key to unlocking that adaptation. As the last of the creatures retreated into the shadows, Ethan stood, his chest heaving with exhaustion. He had done it. He had survived. And in doing so, he had taken the first step toward turning Vorath 7 into something habitable for humanity. But the Zelvar wouldn't like what he had just uncovered. They had assumed that no one could withstand the planet's wrath, but Ethan had just proven them wrong, and in doing so, he had given humanity a chance to take its place among the stars. The storm outside had barely lessened, but Ethan could feel the weight of his accomplishment settle over him. The ancient system was alive, responding to his commands, and for the first time in centuries, the planet's inhospitable conditions were beginning to change. The acid rain, once relentless, had softened into a harmless drizzle, the air less corrosive, the temperature slowly stabilizing. For all the world's hostility, Ethan Cross had turned it on its head. But as the system continued to power up, a new realization dawned on him: he was no longer alone in the chamber. Though the creatures had retreated, something far more dangerous was approaching, the Zelvar. He could feel it, the familiar hum of their technology, cutting through the stillness. They had been watching. They knew the moment this ancient system had awakened. They'd be coming for him soon, and Ethan was sure that their interest was no longer just academic. They would want to control the power he had uncovered, or destroy it to ensure humanity couldn't exploit it. Ethan's console flickered to life, the familiar cold voice of Overseer Velos crackling through. "Human. You have no idea what you've unleashed. The planet was never meant to be conquered. Its systems were designed to maintain balance. You've upset that balance, and now you will pay the price." Ethan's eyes narrowed, his mind already calculating his next steps. The Zelvar had underestimated humanity before, and they were about to do it again. They had assumed this world was beyond reach, beyond taming, but he had proven them wrong. What they didn't understand was that humans were born to adapt, and Ethan had only just begun. He adjusted his gear, pulling his jacket tight against the growing cold. The ruins hummed with power, the energy levels in the chamber at their peak. He could feel it now, the true potential of Vorath 7. The Zelvar thought they could control the galaxy, but they hadn't counted on a species like humanity. They hadn't accounted for human ingenuity, resilience, and the relentless will to survive. The ground rumbled beneath his feet as another shock wave of energy radiated from the core. Ethan felt the shift in the atmosphere. The ancient system was coming online faster than he could have hoped. It wasn't just about surviving the storm now, it was about turning the planet into a beacon of human potential. If the Zelvar wanted to take control, they'd have to go through him. He turned to the central pillar, its surface glowing brighter now, pulsing with life. The energy readings were fluctuating, and for the first time, Ethan saw what the system was truly capable of, terraforming on a scale that defied logic. If he could harness the full scope of it, he could make Vorath 7 into a sanctuary, a haven for humanity to begin anew. A galactic foothold in a hostile galaxy. But that would mean confronting the Zelvar. They wouldn't allow such power to slip into human hands. They would try to take it, destroy it, or erase him and everything he had uncovered. They would come with force, but Ethan wasn't the same man who had entered that drop pod hours ago. He activated his comms, sending a signal to the fleet waiting in orbit, the backup he had arranged, unbeknownst to the Zelvar. "This is Ethan Cross. I have what we need. Prepare to move in." The voice of his commander, a trusted officer from Earth, came through, calm but urgent. "Acknowledged, Ethan. We're moving in. The Zelvar are already on their way, but they're about to find out what humans are capable of." Ethan grinned, the thrill of victory bubbling inside him. For years, the Zelvar had ruled the galaxy with an iron fist, smug in their belief that they were the superior race. They'd never had a reason to fear humanity, until now. They're about to learn the hard way. The sudden blast of energy from the chamber's core sent shockwaves through the ruins, shaking the walls and rattling the floor beneath him. Ethan's console flashed a warning, Zelvar reinforcements detected. It was time. He activated a nearby control panel, watching as the energy surged and the terraform system kicked into overdrive. The surrounding landscape began to shift, acid pools evaporating into breathable air, the skies clearing as the atmospheric processors hummed to life. This was no longer just a survival mission, it was a declaration. A statement that humanity could not only survive but thrive. The Zelvar would come, and they would try to take control of Vorath 7, but this was no longer their world to dominate. Ethan had unlocked the true potential of the planet, and now, humanity's future was in their own hands. He stood tall as the first human ships touched down, their landing gear screeching against the freshly transformed ground. It wasn't just the beginning of a new chapter for Earth, it was the start of a new era in the galaxy. The Zelvar had miscalculated, and humanity was now poised to take its place at the top. The galaxy would never be the same again.